All right, everybody, welcome to TED Talks Finance, episode 3, where we are so excited to be able to welcome Erin Botsford here in Dallas, Texas. This is my colleague and other professional, Luke Hamplin, that we're excited to be able to have this conversation. And Erin, thanks so much for making the time to join us today.
Always happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to be able to brag on you just a little bit. Erin is not only the founder and CEO of the Botsford Group, but she's also a Barron's Top 100 financial advisor, a news contributor to CNBC, Fox Business, The Wall Street Journal, and MSNBC. And beyond that, Erin's model for financial services companies equips the highest level financial professionals in the world. Additionally, she's very interested in philanthropy. So that's quite a mouthful to say. Erin is a very special individual, and we're so grateful to have you here. Luke and I had the pleasure of getting to hear from you a little bit earlier this year, and that's kind of what spurred us getting to talk. But enough about me sharing about you. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your story and what makes you you?
Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, I do have kind of an interesting story. And the question is always, what do you do with that story, right?
Totally.
I'm actually listening to a book on tape by a woman named Leanne Morgan. I don't know if you know her. She's a comedian from Tennessee. And it's really been fun to watch what she did with her story and say, you know, our life happens and we don't realize what we've done until you look back, right? You don't know. So, yeah, I mean, I think I was destined for the financial services business maybe at birth.
Yeah.
I don't know, but life wouldn't have told me that because, you know, I was born in Illinois and my father was a PhD in psychology. But, you know, back in the day, he was like a teacher and he was getting a basic teacher salary, and teachers just don't make a lot of money. But he got an opportunity to move to Southern California in 1970. And so it was going to be an opportunity to open a clinic for early childhood education. It's something he really was passionate about. So we upped our family and we moved out to California. It was 1969, I think. And I was just young. And we got out there, and 6 months into our journey, my father died of a massive heart attack in front of all 6 of us and my mother, as if that wasn't bad. It was on Valentine's Day. So Valentine's Day is always an interesting day for us.
Yeah.
But he left my mother with 6 children and a $10,000 life insurance policy, and that was it. And unfortunately, you know, by the time we moved to California in August of '69 and the time he died, he had to take jobs selling cars. And it was, you know, he was just trying to make a living till his PhD was approved in California. Well, they went broke, and a month before my father died, they repossessed our car, and the week before they repossessed the refrigerator. But the good news was he had taken out the insurance on both the car and the refrigerator, so when he died, then my mother got the car and the refrigerator back.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's silly, but anyway, you know, we went from a kind of a middle-class lifestyle to poverty overnight. And as a kid, you don't really know that, right?
Yeah, blink of an eye.
But yeah, we don't know the difference. And so, you know, my mom, she got $264 a month for herself and $88 a month for my sister and me. My older siblings were over 18, so she got nothing for them. But there were still 7 people living in the house. So, you know, we all had to go to work. And at 11 years old, I was babysitting for this very nice family 6 nights a week. And she was a nurse and he was a doctor. He was a banker and she was a nurse. And so 6 nights a week, I was out till 10 or 11 o'clock at night at 11 years old. But when we came home, they paid me cash, and all of us just put our cash in the middle of the table. That was just our new norm. And so, you know, that's what we did. And that's how Mother paid the bills. And so my story got a little more interesting when I was 16. I actually got my first real job at McDonald's. A lot of people start off at McDonald's.
Yeah.
I was on my way to work one day, the day after Thanksgiving, 1974, and I was getting ready to make a left-hand turn, and so I was going very slow, and all of a sudden I felt this boom. And my car kind of, you know, lurched, and I put the car into park, and I got out, and I had no idea what had happened, but I got out of the car, and I went around, and I looked out in the front, and there was a motorcycle embedded into the front of my car. The handlebar was just completely embedded, but there was nobody on the motorcycle. And so I was so stunned. I didn't know what was going on, but I turned around and there was a big ditch, maybe 100 yards away.
Yeah.
And I got to the ditch and there was a young man, obviously the motorcycle rider, who was laying in the ditch just bleeding profusely. So of course I started screaming and all of that, and these two people, a husband and wife, came up to the scene of the accident, and the wife went to this young man and the husband went to me, and turns out it was his parents. And he was only about maybe 50 yards away from home. But he had borrowed the bike that morning. Unfortunately, he was 18 at the time. Turns out he was going 47 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone. I was going 17, but it was a really horrible time in my life. You know, because there were really no witness to the accident, I was charged by the state of California with involuntary manslaughter. And, you know, that's a big word, big thing for a 16-year-old girl. And so I remember we met with this man called an attorney, and the attorney said to my mom, Mrs. McGowan, that's my maiden name, this is purely a matter of economics. If your daughter will just plead guilty to these charges, I'm happy to go in and enter the plea at no cost. But if you want to defend your daughter, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Well, guys, you know, money wasn't a resource that we had, so I remember my mother standing up to shake the man's hand, and she said, okay, you know, she'll plead guilty. And I tell people I really did have kind of an out-of-body experience. I was like, I could see myself on top of the ceiling. I was looking down at this scene. It was so horrific to me, and I'm pleading with my mother saying, Mom, please don't make me plead guilty. I'm a good girl. I was a 4.0 student, vice president of my junior class. But imagine being my mother on the other side of that equation. And she looked at me and she goes, honey, I'm so sorry, we have no money, and therefore we have no choice. And I always tell people that was the day, the moment that I learned money buys you choices or the lack thereof, right? So
absolutely.
Going on, and you can stop me anytime, but we went home and my older brothers and sisters were talking about me like I wasn't there. And they're like, Mom, you know, we can't make her plead guilty to killing somebody. And my older brother, Tim, the wisdom of my family, was 22 years old at the time. And he said, one thing my mother had done well, she had taken $3,000 of my dad's $10,000, and she bought a home in Southern California, if you can believe that. And it had appreciated in value, so we took a second mortgage against our family home to pay for my defense. And of course, I was found not guilty. And I remember the judge saying to my attorney, saying, take this little girl home. She's been through enough. And then, of course, 3 weeks after that judgment, or that came out that I was not guilty, the family of this young man sued my mother and me for just a ridiculous amount of money. Yeah. Now, the good news was the insurance company, Allstate Insurance, happened to be our insurance company at the time, and they kicked in, and then it was their attorneys that paid for the next litigation. Right. But it was still trying to go through high school and then enter college with this dark cloud always over me. Yeah. And I think the best news about it was there was a young man named Bob Botsford, and we happened to be in algebra class together. And I remember the first day I ever laid eyes on him, I thought he was the most beautiful person I'd ever met. And I literally told all my friends, I'm going to marry that guy someday. Well, he didn't know me for Adam, you know, until the car accident happened, and my picture was on the front page of the paper. And think about that. At age 16, they didn't even protect the identity of minors. Yeah. So my picture's on the front page of the paper, and Bob Botsford opens it up on a Sunday and says to his parents, oh my gosh, that girl's in my algebra class. So, you know, I think there are better ways to get noticed by your future husband, but that's the way he noticed me. So so we started dating, and you know, the best part was Bob entered the Air Force as a pilot, fighter pilot, and we moved. And it was good for me to get away from all of that, because everywhere I went, I still was that girl that killed that boy, because they never printed the outcome of the trial. It never went in. It was just gone. So it was really good for me. We moved 17 times in the first 14 years we were married. I continued to go to college. It took me 11 years and 7 colleges, going at night and working during the day. So it was a very, let's call it a low-class life. I mean, it was nothing to write home about. It certainly it never dawned on me that I was going to create an amazing career out of the clay that was, right? But that's what happened. So
of course. Something that you mentioned, and first of all, I want to say your story is exactly as I remember it. And it is
Well, it doesn't change.
No, I mean, it's true. Oftentimes you hear people say, what's your why? What are the defining moments in someone's life that leads them to make choices, or however they're socialized growing up? You clearly had a very strong and pressing why from a young age because of traumatic and, just events that one could never forget.
Sure.
One thing that you mentioned is that saying is money buys you choices or the lack thereof.
Correct.
Life insurance is something, you mentioned your dad had $10,000 of life insurance. And I remember you saying quite some time ago, we never want to blame anybody who's going through a hard time, but something I remember you saying is, Dad, it would have been nice to have a little bit more life insurance. Something that Luke and I find a lot is when we're putting together what we consider to be comprehensive financial plans for people, a lot of times people don't understand why we may pair life insurance specifically, let alone other kinds, with their financial plan.
Sure.
The feeling is, well, I would rather take that money and invest it and do these other things. What would you say to that person that might be saying, well, I'd rather invest that money than have this life insurance? Say someone married, 4 kids.
Yeah. Well, I would say that's very short-sighted and it's very selfish. I have to say that. Yeah. But I do understand, and I'll give you an example. So my son, Kevin, I have 1 son and 3 grandsons, and he also followed his father's footsteps, and he joined the military as well. He was a navigator, AC-130 gunships. He did 6 deployments to the Middle East.
Wow.
And at one point, I think right after he had his first son or maybe a second son, I kind of hadn't thought through this, but all of a sudden I had this epiphany, and I thought, Kevin is deploying to the Middle East. He's done 200 combat missions. If something happened to him, then I think the military at the time was paying $400,000 in life insurance. And if you do the math, $400,000 even times 5%. I mean, my daughter-in-law couldn't raise 2 children with that.
Absolutely.
Now, admittedly, Kevin didn't have the money. Military people just don't make that much money. So Bob and I decided, okay. So we paid for a $2 million policy on our son, a 20-year policy, because I thought, I love my grandchildren, but I don't necessarily want to raise them.
Yeah.
And talk about a good investment. The investment in making that life insurance payment, that decision, gave me a lot of peace at night, because God knows if I lost my son, that would be one tragedy. If I lost my son and then his children were left, homeless or whatever. I mean, talk about compounding that loss. Right. Well, then I realized, oh my gosh, okay, so what about my daughter-in-law? She's a stay-at-home mom, but if my son, something happened to her, it's not like the military would say, okay, you can just stay home. He would still have to deploy.
Yeah.
So she's dead, now who's going to take care of those kids again? So we put $1 million of life insurance on her.
Can't neglect the spouse.
No, I mean, no, exactly. And what was interesting, guys, is about less than 6 months later, my daughter-in-law had an incident where she ended up in the hospital here in town, and she became so severely dehydrated, the doctor said, had she not come in within a couple hours, she'd be lights out. And I was like, thank God we had the life insurance, but she was 24 years old at the time.
Oh my God.
I mean, who thinks of a 24-year-old? But she just had severe dehydration, and boy, was I glad I had that policy. I love worship and adore my daughter-in-law, but if she's not here, truthfully, I have a life to live too, and I want there to be resources to take care of my precious grandchildren. And so I want your clients, anybody that listens to this, they need to think through that. And think through the ramifications. I've tried to always have all of my clients, I want to know about all of their sons, their daughters, their daughter-in-laws. I want to make sure that all those people are covered with life insurance so that my clients can go live the dreams that they had set out. It was a big part of my practice. I was the financial director. I wanted to know everything about these people so that wouldn't happen to them.
Yeah, that example you said, so that you can go live your dreams.
Sure.
People forget that if something traumatic happens to you, it affects your ability to do everything else. I say all the time to people, would you drive a Ferrari without insurance on that vehicle? I think of our lives like that Ferrari, or your financial plan like that Ferrari. You save and you work and you toil your whole life to have this thing that you love so much. Great, you might be a really good driver, but quite literally in a scenario, you could drive out on the road right now, someone else hits you
Right.
And what was that Ferrari worth if it's totaled and you didn't have insurance? Nothing. Just the same way, you could potentially leave behind a whole family with all of those things, and it is astronomical, the detrimental effect that it can have on someone in that way.
Well, I want to point out another story because, I started off in the business as a stockbroker, and, we did stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and we did retirement planning.
Yeah.
And shame on me, but that's all the training that I had. And something happened with a client, because even with my personal background, it hadn't yet hit me in a professional way about the importance of things like life insurance. I was just managing investments. And so it was 1992, this couple came in. He had just retired from Zeneca Pharmaceuticals, and they had their plan. They had plenty of money, and they had their life's plan laid out in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. From 55 to 70, they were going to travel internationally. From 70 on, they were going to come back and start traveling domestic. I'd never seen a life plan like that, and they created it. And so now all I was supposed to do is make sure that they had the funds to do that.
Totally.
Oh, we came up with this great plan. Well, about 6 months after we retired, I get this horrible phone call. Their oldest son, Mike, age 41, he died of a heart attack while washing his car in the driveway. He had no life insurance at all. His wife was a stay-at-home mom of 4 children. He had a huge mortgage on his house, and he had just borrowed $800,000 to start a business. And guess whose problem that became? Mike and Dee's. And I sat there, I was so early in the business, and I wondered, oh my gosh, it was horrific. And all of their dreams just were shattered.
Gone.
Because now their stay-at-home mom had to go back to work.
Yep.
And Mike and Dee had to jump in there and take kids to practices and figure out a way to pay off that $800,000 loan. What about the mortgage?
Yep.
It was a financial disaster. And I remember that was in my business, that was my epiphany. Like, I don't want anybody to ever walk through these doors and depend on me for advice and only give them partial advice.
Of course.
Giving partial advice is like giving no advice.
Yep.
In fact, you can hurt people. I'd rather them go down the street and work with somebody who will give them holistic, full advice than take their money and potentially hurt them.
And a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to protect those things.
Yep.
That 20-year policy you mentioned on your son
was
who was
nothing.
in the military, it's pennies on the dollar to be able to protect something that is so important.
Sure.
We ask clients a lot of times, what's the most important thing to you? Let's get away from finances, zoom out, everything. What's important to you? Oh, you love your wife, you love kids, you love God, you love all these things. Okay, what happens if none of those things can be taken care of? That would be the most detrimental thing to you, right? Okay, so what if I told you that a finite, minuscule percentage of what your total planning budget is could protect all of those things, and that's the cost of admission. That's the tuition to protect the rest of the plan.
Absolutely.
Nick Murray, we heard from a lot of years ago of we insure against what can go wrong to afford the luxury and build what can go right.
Right. I like that.
In your financial planning process, I'd argue that you have a system and a process that's different from almost anybody else.
Yep.
One thing that you've built your business and your cornerstone on was financial planning fees. You just shared about how when you become the financial director for someone, you're no longer saying, I'm here to give you partial advice. Maybe it's on your taxes, maybe it's on your life insurance, maybe it's on your investments. No, I'm the quarterback.
Yep.
Right? I'm putting all of these things together. How did you arrive at making sure that you see that whole picture, and what helped you implement your process?
Well, I arrived after that one scenario of seeing clients who theoretically came to me and entrusted their life savings to me. And all I did was, and I talk about to advisors, I focused on the investment side, the retirement planning side of the balance sheet. After that, I really started figuring out, let's talk about the risk side of the balance sheet first. Let's shore up all these risks that are out there. Because, my saying is whether the client is $1 million or 10 million or anywhere in between, if an event happened, and I always assure them those events happen in a split second of time,
my gosh, yes.
to cause them to lose all that money, I don't really care how well their money managers are doing. It's just that much more for them to lose. So yeah, I really, and I had to kind of learn by myself. I found a couple of mentors out there. One of my first mentors, her name was Amy Levitt. I always like to give her credit. In 1997, she was living in a town called Quechee, Vermont. I think there's 500 people in that town. And her minimum financial planning fee that she was charging was $14,400 per year to work with people.
Yeah.
And she really taught me, she goes, people really want to pay for advice that's separate and apart from investments or insurance.
Right.
They want unbiased, advice. And it took me a while, to adopt that, because up until that point, we'd pretty much been giving, quote, our advice for free.
Yeah.
And I realized, that old saying, people only value what they pay for.
Yep.
And
isn't that the truth?
And that the same thing is true. And what I realized was, when I met with a prospect and I focused on the risk side of the balance sheet and showed them how vulnerable they were, they always they looked at me like, oh my gosh, how come my current advisor has never talked to me about these things? And my response was, I don't know, but if we work together, we can get these things fixed. Well, there's value to that. And so what my job was to do, is always been to do, is to prevent catastrophic loss.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to point out something, guys, for financial advisors, is sometimes they get intimidated by, if I point out all these vulnerabilities, and I've come up with like 22 different vulnerabilities or weaknesses that typically exist in a potential client's life. Yeah. They're always worried that they're not going to be able to, they don't know how to fix those things. So I give this example, and I think it's a good one for advisors, and that is, instead of thinking of yourself as a financial advisor or a financial director, I want you just for a moment to think of yourself as a property manager. And I use the example, I own a home here in Texas, and I have one in Park City, Utah. And in Park City, I have a property manager, Harry, and he comes every week, and he goes around the perimeter of my house in Utah. He comes inside, he flushes the toilets, and he checks under the sinks, make sure there's no leaks. And so last December, Harry called me up and said, Erin, he goes, you've got two problems at your house. And he said, one, downstairs in the basement, you have a leaky toilet. If we don't get that fixed, it could cause a massive flood in your basement. I actually had a friend in Utah that had a massive flood. It was a $400,000 problem.
Yeah, not a
I was
small
like, oh my gosh, Harry, how quickly can we get that fixed? Right. He also said, and I looked on top, and some of your heat tape on your roof is not working. If we have another massive snow like we did last year, potentially your roof could collapse. I mean, that would be a catastrophe. Yeah. But I want to point out the fact that Harry never once got on his hands and knees and pulled out, tools and fixed my toilet.
He just outlined the problem.
Harry hired other professionals to come in and fix that problem. He didn't get on my roof and fix my heat tape. He hired other professionals to come in and do that. So for financial advisors, I just want to take the fear away. You don't have to know how to fix the problem.
Right. Yeah.
You just need to be able to identify there is a potential problem or a weakness that leaves your clients vulnerable to catastrophic loss.
Right.
And I think it's our job to be able to do that.
Yeah, and you're only as good as your weakest link, right?
Sure.
The example of a chain.
Sure.
What you mentioned with those financial planning fees, that people pay for what they care for.
Sure.
Right? They care about what they've paid for. People oftentimes with advisor compensation think about managed assets, those investments, those stocks, mutual funds, bonds, ETFs, you name it. When you are putting together that comprehensive strategy and outlining, hey, here are the litany of things that could ruin all the best things you like.
Yep.
Right? I asked you, hey, what are your goals? What are the hopes and dreams of your life? Great, here's the things that could completely ruin it.
Yep.
The process of you as a professional putting that together for them, you should be charging for that.
Yeah.
That is what you are hired for. You're the professional. Sometimes what I see in our day-to-day, and I'm sure Luke can attest to this too, is sometimes there's pushback on financial planning fees to say, hey, why am I paying a fee just for admission, right? I'm already maybe paying you from my percentage of my investment accounts. How have you helped work through that with clients, and what might be the value that you show them that they might not understand from the get-go?
Well, first of all, from the financial advisor's perspective, if the financial advisor ever gets pushback on the financial planning fee, that tells me very specifically that they did not point out the consequences to their prospects of doing nothing.
Right.
The consequences of inaction. And I think that people, it's kind of like stories sell or stories make a point. I always tell advisors, you have to put people at the scene of the accident. You have to have them imagine their grandchildren being fatherless with no money. I mean, they have to see themselves in the picture.
Have to put them there.
And are we doing that out of fear? No, of course not. We're doing it because life really does happen. I mean, I'm kind of lucky in that it all happened to me. The only thing I haven't been through is a divorce. I mean, and I pray that I don't, or I'm not a widow, so I can't relate to either of those things.
Right.
But life does happen. And car accidents are not only the most common things, but they're the most litigious things.
Absolutely.
Also, you know, if people have second homes, they have second homes in their personal names. I'm like, oh my gosh, do you realize that if it's in your personal name, you've got a lake house, it's in your personal name, that if somebody on your boat, you typically have a boat, somebody comes over and they're skiing and they have a boating accident on or associated with your property, not only are you going to be sued for the value of that property, but you're going to be sued for everything else, every bank account, every brokerage account, everything that you have that's in your personal names. Now, what is the fact that your attorney didn't tell you that, the fact that your real estate agent allowed you to put that second property in your personal names and you just figured it out, what's that worth to your clients? I mean, we get paid for our wisdom. And especially, it's not hard when they realize their current advisor has kept them vulnerable. It's not hard at all. They're mad at that current advisor. Like, why didn't they point out that I had vulnerabilities here? So, truthfully, when I point out the weaknesses that exist, I have never had pushback. Ever.
And you know, I asked that question for some folks that you know, Luke and I even have as colleagues that have said, you know, how do you implement this financial planning fee strategy? And I oftentimes add the same, you know, adage of, well, did you create enough value in what your proposed plan, and was it appropriate for the fee that you're charging? You know, building a financial planning fee-based practice is something that's creating longevity. You know, something that's repeatable. One thing I really admire about you is the way that you built your business to have such massive scale, and what you said about, it was Harry from Park City, right? Harry reaches for delegation and wisdom from other people that are probably in certain areas much smarter than him. That's our job, right? To look for somebody and say, hey, you do have a lot of problems. And no, I can't answer them all for you, but my job is to quarterback this thing for you, truthfully. You know, how did you come to the point where you realized, hey, as this financial director, as this owner of a financial services company, I have outgrown my own ability. Now I need to be able to scale and hire other people. When was that moment for you?
Well, so I started in the business and I'd been working for about 10 years. And truthfully, I was just getting marginal results. And so I went into my branch manager and I said, I'm quitting, I'm done. I really just wanted to go get a job with a regular paycheck. Because back in the day, especially, we were working on commissions, and some months would be great and the next months would be zero. And it was such a terrible business model, just a commission-based business. And so I remember there was one year I hadn't taken a day off, and on Christmas Eve, I hadn't put up a tree, I had nothing. I mean, no presents for my child, nothing. So that's when I decided, I'm done, I'm quitting. Well, my branch manager said, why don't you go get some business coaching? And I thought, okay. And he kept saying, oh, Erin, you're not a quitter. And as you can imagine, I'm not a quitter. I'm like one of those Mariska dolls. That,
what do you mean, you're motivated?
You knock me over, I'm going to come back, right? And so I enrolled in a coaching program, and then something happened. It was the third year, the 12th session, and our coach said, hey, everybody, stand up and report your progress to somebody else in class. And I stood up and I saw a random guy, looked just like you, and I said, hey, you want to do the exercise together? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay. I said, I'm going to go first, because I was really happy with my progress. And I said, hey, I'm Erin Botsford, I'm from Dallas, Texas. I said, 3 years ago, I was doing around $300,000 in, they call it production back then. And I said, this year, I'm on target between 400 and 450. And I thought, look at me. I mean, I was really happy with my progress. And so then it was his turn. His name was Paul. And he said, he goes, yeah, I'm in the financial services business as well. In fact, he was with a wirehouse firm. And he said, 3 years ago, I was doing 300,000 in production. And I'm thinking to myself, well, look at that. We are just alike. And then Paul said the words I'll never forget. He said, this year, I'm on target to do 3 million in production. He said, I don't meet with any of my existing clients anymore. What I do is, my job is to go out and prospect for my next ideal client, share the philosophy of my firm, and then turn those clients. I built a whole team around me, licensed team members that can take care and service these existing clients. Of course, I'm like, what did you just say?
Excuse me?
I was like, did you say it went from 300,000 to 3 million in 3 years? He's like, yep. And you don't meet with all your clients for their quarterly, their annual reviews? He goes, no, I've built a whole team around me to do that. And of course I had to think, did I miss a coaching session?
Yeah. What did I miss?
Or did he, was he in another one on Mars? I mean, I just couldn't imagine. So, of course, the bell rang. It's time to go back to our seats. And I was just standing there just in a complete stupor. I'm like, Paul, could I just buy a few hours of your time? And he was so gracious. And he's like, why don't you just come spend the day with me and my team? So literally, as quick as I could back to Texas, I made my husband, Bob. Bob is an airline pilot. I'm like, okay, you have to come with me. Because I wanted Bob to understand, I just knew there was going to be a big cost to getting results like that. And maybe it was going to be, well, you have to divorce your husband. And I wanted Bob to understand why. Or maybe you have to sell your firstborn child. Because I just knew there was going to be this huge cost. So I spent one day with Paul. And what was interesting, guys, is that we really didn't talk about steps. It was all mindset. It was like, and it really was thinking about things like, okay, Erin, what do you want to have happen on the last day you're in business? I think at the time, I don't know, I was 29, 30 years old or whatever. I'm like, okay, I didn't have any idea. I was so myopic looking at what I was doing today and tomorrow. Maybe I thought about next year, but I could never see 30 years down the line. And so he painted a vision for me and he said, okay, so let's, and that's what I get advisors to think about. What do you want to have happen on the last day? The nice thing is, the end result for me is I got a very large check on the last day.
Yeah, big time.
And the reason I could get a large check was because the business did not depend on me to meet with any client. And so I tell advisors, the day that the buyer bought my firm, they bought another woman's firm. She had about the same amount of AUM as I did. She had a lot of employees too, but she had two things going against her. One, all of her clients expected and depended to meet with her, but two, she'd had a massive stroke. So the buyer looking at that situation had to price in that dependency.
Considering attrition that was likely to happen.
And she ended up with 25 cents on the dollar compared to me. And I think to myself, like, when I talk to advisors, I always say, is that an outcome that you'd be really proud of? And you know what? I'm sure she never thought, who thought she was going to have a stroke? The problem is she didn't think about it. So I think one of the gifts that Paul gave me was think about what you want that business to look like on the last day. And I could very easily see, I wanted it to look like Paul's. And then once you see the vision, this is what I want it to look like, then backing into it becomes very easy. But you have to have a vision for what that looks like.
Totally.
Go ahead.
You saying that additionally, is that an outcome that would
make you proud?
Make you proud. That's something that you can say to clients too when you illustrate the potential scenario. Okay, so these are the things that you may be pushing back on in our financial plan. Well, let me paint a picture for you of putting you at the scene of the crime in this scenario or in the scene of the accident. You didn't have XYZ that we are telling you that you need in this scenario, and this happens. Would that be an outcome that you are pleased with? So I think that's powerful. And I also want you to know, Paul, to you and the way that he assisted you, you're paying it forward here with Luke and I right now. Truly, the way that Erin has been able to build her practice and train and coach others, with her unique ability is really amazing. Paul sharing with you about his literal 10x going from 300,000 to 3 million, that mindset of, okay, if I wanted to double my business, I would think work harder. But if I wanted to blow the whole model up and say, I have to literally 10x my business this year, you have to totally change your frame of thinking. That model that you implemented of figuring out, hey, it is going to take a village. I can't do this alone. I want to hear from Luke a little bit because Luke is in this scenario that you've painted. Luke has worked largely with a veteran advisor, Gene Abney, who we really respect. And their plan in time, and is currently happening, is Luke and a team of other people taking over that practice from Gene and not relying on him in every way. Luke, why don't you just share a little bit about what your experience has been? And Luke's also a student of Erin's as well.
Yes. So we're going through that now, and we're transitioning. He's had these clients for years, and they've met with him. So making the transition from he's no longer going to be here, but still in the practice a little bit, to us and my other partner being the main advisors on their plan has given them such comfortability that I didn't expect. They love him, adore him, they think he's the best thing in the world, but seeing them come and be comfortable with us and know, hey, they're in good hands with us has been one of the best things that I've been a part of, to be honest.
And realizing that there's a team with you also gives a sense of credibility. You know,
Yeah, your clients want to know that you're growing. They want to work with successful people and successful practices.
Yeah.
If you don't show signs of growth, they have to think, and especially as they're growing and they're growing in their net worth, you know, they're going to go, you know, I need to go work with somebody who's growing along with me.
Totally.
That's a risk to the business.
yeah, and if you have to be there with them the whole time, they can look at you and say, well, I'm growing. Why am I still meeting with you every single time?
Correct.
Shouldn't you need a team to be able to handle me at
Correct.
this point?
Well, what sparked his interest was his clients started asking, what's going to happen when you're gone?
Sure.
I mean, he's getting up, he's 65, but they're like, hey, we put this plan together for years and years and years.
Yeah.
If something happens to you, what's going to happen to our plan?
Right.
We have all these things in place, but if you're gone, so that's kind of what sparked his interest to bring on someone to help facilitate that.
Yeah, you know, the concept of, you know, hire slowly, fire quickly. How did you go about finding the right people? You know, there's a book I read called Who Not How.
Yeah.
And, you know, that same idea of you don't want to waste your time hiring someone that's going to be gone or out the door next
Yeah.
year. You know, but if they are the wrong person, you got to get rid of them quick. How did you find those hires slowly?
Well, after my one day with Paul, I was sharing one female assistant with 4 other guys. I went to the branch manager and said, hey, can I have her full time? And I went to her and said, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to go out and bring in new business, and you're going to do everything else. Now, fortunately for me, she was 20, very smart, right out of college. She graduated in 3 years. And she was so naive. She goes, okay, you know. So then we started hiring other people. I like to get them right out of college.
Yeah.
University of North Texas has a degree program in CFP.
Yeah.
So does Texas Tech. A lot of, you know, especially a lot of colleges now have the degree programs in financial planning.
Yeah.
And I also use that test, the Colby test. So I'm a big believer in the Colby test. I took the test, my Kaylin, my assistant, took the test, and then we would narrow it down to 2 or 3 candidates, and we wanted them to take the test because we wanted them to have different attributes, different skill sets than what we had.
Is the Colby test kind of like a Myers-Briggs or
It
skills
is.
test to see what you excel
It's similar. It's almost a personality. Like my Colby was a 4-4-10-1, which is I was 4 fact finder, which isn't high, 4 follow through, which isn't high, 10 quick start. I'm an idea a minute, and then the last one, the one we don't even count in our business. The nice thing was Kaylin, she was a 6-6-6. I know sometimes we call it the mark of the devil, right?
Right.
But we needed people that were high fact finder, things to make up for my weaknesses. Right. So I wanted somebody that was a 7-8 fact finder, a 7-8 follow through. They didn't have to have high quick start. I didn't need any more ideas. I had all the ideas I wanted. So as we narrowed down, we'd get down to 2 or 3 candidates. We gave them all this test because they all look the same on paper. They've got this degree or that, but we wanted to see. And the Colby test, I think the key is have them fill it out while they're there, and don't give them a lot of direction. In other words, don't send them home and say, take this test, because it can be manipulated.
Yeah.
If they have an idea of what you want to see in it, they can manipulate it. So I would say, pay for it, get them on a laptop, do it in the office, and then we would typically hire from that. And then the key for me is their work ethic. I fired based on work ethic. I could teach them how to do the job, especially when they came in with a financial planning degree. But if they were late showing up, they were, you know, on their phones all the time or whatever. It was a work ethic, and I would within 90 days I would fire them. If I didn't see, I didn't tell them.
Yeah, of course.
Because I don't want them being really, really good for 90 days and then slacking off.
You want them to be their true self,
Their
not,
true self,
not paint
right.
something for you.
It was always about work ethic to me.
Yeah, okay, outstanding. You know, we mentioned earlier that Erin was a member of the Barron's 100. That is a big deal in the financial services industry, and you don't get there without massive growth and repeatable growth. With that being said, Erin, how large was your team at the height of the Botsford Group before you eventually left?
Right, I had 18 employees. So my one day home, on the way home from my day with Paul, he literally gave me some exercises, write out your goals, right? Well, at the time with Paul, you know, he had 7 conference rooms filled with clients of his firm, and he wasn't in any one of them.
Yeah.
So wanting to model that, you know, someday I wanted to have 2 offices, one in Dallas, one in Atlanta. I wanted to have 7 conference rooms filled with clients of my firm, and I wasn't in any one of them.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what happened. And what I tell advisors is, I should have written, I want to have 20 offices, 120 employees, right, you know, and 300 conference rooms. So when you set your initial goals, set them larger. That was small thinking for me, in truth. It was small thinking, but it was all I had to model at that time.
Right.
So set bigger goals, because what I think is interesting is when you put those goals out into the universe or something, it's like your mind has to stay, it's got to stay consistent with itself. So you have to go for those things, and you will find the tools, you'll find the methods to get to those goals.
Right. Absolutely.
And I always tell people just, and that's a mistake I made. I wish I had had bigger goals than that. So.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to hear, wishing that you had shot higher and bigger, because when I think of you, right, I think, end goal in terms of what my practice is. So that's encouraging to hear, shoot for those big goals and find a way to make them happen. One thing that people ask me a lot and clients ask me is, TJ, why are you doing the things that you're doing? What's the mission of your practice or your goals? Something I heard you share when we were in Omaha earlier this year, that when you said it, it literally was, hey, that's exactly what I've said I want to do. You mentioned taking all of your favorite people with you on a very fun and substantial and expensive vacation. One thing I've said to my clients and friends for many years is, my goal is to have more money and grow more wealth than I ever have to worry about giving away. Your why, or the personal aspect of what you were growing your business to do, has more of a philanthropic and personal side to those things. Why don't you share a little bit about what your life and maybe some extra purpose outside of your business was?
Yeah, I think because of the way I was raised, and when my dad died, my mom had to go back to work. And so I kind of became an orphan. And it really has only occurred to me, like, why was it? Because I'm very philanthropic towards orphans, specifically in Africa. And I don't know how I got there, except that we've done about 9 safaris. We love Africa.
Yeah.
And on maybe our second safari back in 2009, every time we'd go, every day we would have some kind of a cultural experience. We'd go to, a tribe over here, or whatever. So this particular day, our guide said, we're going to go stop by an orphanage. I'm like, okay, cool, And I go in there, and this woman, we're in this room, and it was a very clean, bright room, but there was 40 babies and 20 cribs. And there was only one house mother there, and there was about 16 of us, 8 couples, and she said, we go in there, and she goes, oh, could you guys please just hold babies? And we're like, yeah, sure. And the first child I picked up was a little boy, and his eyes were just vacant. There was nobody there. And by the way, the weirdest part was, you walk in, none of the babies were crying. Imagine walking into any room with 40 babies and nobody's crying, because they learned very early on, nobody's coming to get them. Imagine that. And so I picked up this little boy, and I started talking to him and stuff, and I literally watched his eyes come to life. And it was like, oh my gosh. And I realized that the human touch is so important.
Yeah.
And this kid, probably the only time, he probably got his diaper changed once a day, and the only touch that he got. And so, I took my phone and I took pictures of him. And anyway, so that was so profound. And then we went into the toddler room, and I have pictures of the toddlers. Now, again, they can crawl, and they can walk and talk, and they were just crawling. Bob and I were sitting on a couch, and they were crawling. They wanted to get like kittens. They wanted to get as close up to us as possible.
Yeah.
And we had them all over us, and they were like scrambling to get closer to us. Again, the human touch. And so then we went to the girls' home and the boys' home, and she had a 40-acre farm, and she had a elementary school and a high school, and she'd done all this since 2002. In 7 years, she'd grown all of this. She was helping 500 children. And so, of course, it's our cultural experience. It's time for us to leave. And I said, Ranji, can I take just a moment? I want to talk to you a little bit. And because Bob and I have always been generous. We believe in generosity.
Yeah.
But I said, how much does it take to do all of this?
Yeah.
Baby home, toddler home, girls home, boys home, 40-acre farm, 2 schools, and she said around $400,000 US. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
This is 2009, but I'm like, you do all of this for $400,000? She goes, yeah. And so all of us were crying when we got back into our little vehicle, and I said to Bob, we were sitting in the way back, and I go, oh my God, we could make such a big difference right here. Because of course, all she did, what do you think her big role was? fundraising.
Yeah.
Well, imagine what she could do if I took the fundraising piece off of her.
Yeah.
Imagine. So Bob and I became the primary donors after that. And then we realized later on, we were actually putting Ranji at risk. If something happened to us collectively, what happens to her? So we did buy a $5 million policy for that very purpose. If we die, that $5 million goes to, not to her, but to our foundation, and that would be paid out to her. We got our son and daughter-in-law very involved in what we do as well. But then we started, finally around 2015, we started asking our friends to donate because we thought it's too big of a risk for us to be the primary. So now we have a lot. And what we found is, especially our friends, the people we choose to hang out with, everybody's very generous. Everybody wants to feel like they're making a difference.
Right.
So we started off with Ebenezer, and last year in 2023, we spent 24 days in Africa. We found out about another program called Zoe Empowers, which I'm super excited about. And what they do is we had actually fly by a private helicopter up to this remote area of Kenya, and they take young people from the ages of 16 to 23, and they put them in family groups of 25. And the difference is, well, let me back up and say, unfortunately, the entire continent is a continent of dependence. And unfortunately, we in the West have made it so. We create Tom's shoes, buy a pair of shoes, we'll give one.
Right.
So they sit there and they wait for the shoe drop, they wait for the malaria net drop, and we've not empowered them for financial independence. So with Zoe, they came in. What was interesting, guys, is that Zoe was started the same year we started supporting Ebenezer, 2009. Okay, we've helped between 500,000 children over those years. They're up to 228,000 children that they've taken from dependency to financial independence. And so it's really cool. They take these kids, and the difference is they don't give them anything up front. They give them an opportunity. They paint a vision of the opportunity, but they have to get together every month and they learn something. So the first 9 months they learn, how to purify their water, sexual abstinence, whatever. And after 9 months, if they've completed all of these things, then they get two things. They get a warm blanket and they get a collection device for collecting water. And oh my gosh, we met with these 25 kids and they were so proud of that accomplishment. Awesome. And then after that, what they do is they teach them a skill. So this one girl, we got to talk to all 25 of these kids. One girl was a plumber. I said, why'd you want to become a plumber? She goes, there's no female plumbers in my village. Yeah. Once she became a plumber and became successful, then, by the way, the only thing Zoe does is they do seed this family with $2,500 worth of micro loans. Right. It's not a gift. Okay. It's got to be paid back. So this young girl said, now I want to open a grocery store. So she went back to the family and said, can I borrow the money for inventory? So she borrowed $300 or whatever. So we went to her grocery store. She probably has 200 products in there. So now she's a plumber. She owns a grocery store. And I said, well, how do you keep people from stealing your supplies, your inventory? She goes, well, I found a local homeless man. I hired him, and he spends the night here. So now he has a place to sleep. Yep. And he's got a job. Yeah. And it protects my inventory. But
adding value.
Anyway, the bottom line is Bob and I were so impressed with this.
Yes.
I said, are you in Zambia? I wanted to know, are you in Livingston, Zambia, where our other orphanage is? And they said, no, but we'd love to be. So I said, well, how much would it take to bring Zoe to Zambia? And he gave me a number, and it kind of took my breath away, but I was like, okay, let us go home and think about it, pray about it. And I said, if I donate this amount of money over the next 3 years, how many kids' lives will be changed? He said between 4,000 and 5,000. Wow. So I said, done. Yep. Yeah. Anyway, so, and I will say this, and thank you, whoever's listening, any Mutual of Omaha advisor, any advisor, it's because of the success of our training company that we're able to do this. Yes. So I'm super excited about that. My goal, we also have a third, is a missionary organization called Overland Missions in Livingston, Zambia as well, and they are converting the nations to Christianity, which is super awesome, and we made a very large commitment to them. Here's the deal, guys. I have enough. Yeah. And if I had 100 million more, I'm not going to change my lifestyle. Right. This is how I live. Yep. Right? I travel first class everywhere. I don't need any more money. Now my entire purpose in life is, can I make life better for people who will never have the opportunities that I've had? And I will say, this industry, oh my gosh, what a blessing that all three of us found our way to this industry, because the difference between this and anything else is there's nobody telling us how much we can make.
Absolutely.
The sky's the limit, right?
Right.
And I think it's sad when people cap their dreams. Well, and a lot of times it's because if your only goal is to provide for your own personal comfort, and that's, I'm not dissing it.
Yeah.
That's never a large enough goal
Yeah.
to become a superstar.
Right.
So I always think you have to care about something or some person, something other than yourself in order to be. Look at Tony Robbins. He feeds like 50 million
Yeah.
kids, you know, and because his goals are so much higher than his own personal comfort.
Right.
And I'm glad my goals ended up becoming more than my personal comfort, because now everything above what we have goes.
Yeah.
So
something that I saw not long ago was that qualities of people that are typically high in intellect and IQ is the amount of prosperity that they create around them.
yeah,
Right? You want to be a lamp that's shining to the whole house,
Sure.
not put under a bowl.
Sure.
And, it sounds like we're all largely people of faith here.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I like to reference and think about all the time is just that. What is the value that we are creating and adding for other people around us, whether it's from a completely monetary standpoint and creating wealth and prosperity for the people around us, or what it sounds like a lot of our ultimate vision is to help other people know Christ.
Right.
And be able to share the good news that we have been shared. And so it's inspiring and it's moving to get to hear about the things that you are doing and the impact that you're having. You
well,
said
it's small, and in the big
course,
scheme of
but-
things, it's small, but it's I'm only held accountable for what
course.
I do, right?
It's
And
meaningful.
so
Yeah. You said, many of my friends are very generous in that
Sure.
way. Birds of a feather, they flock together, right? And so I oftentimes like to use that saying, because of you, when I'm thinking about attracting an ideal client and working towards who are the people that we actually want to work with in that way. Attracting that ideal client, you have to move up market, because a lot of people wouldn't say my ideal client is a small person that doesn't end up lending value or monetary value to our
Sure.
practice. How can you move up market with your ideal clients to find the clients that know the other people that are ideal for you?
Well, what I teach is you have to understand the issues of these high net worth people.
Right.
And it's interesting when you understand their issues and you can relate to them as human beings, and you understand most of the time these high net worth people, they're very risk averse.
Yes.
They are your ideal clients because they're risk averse. They've made their money. And the laughable thing is to think that you're going to come in and help them make money.
Yeah.
They've already made their money.
not your job.
They only need you to protect their downside.
Yep.
Right? And so the idea that you're going to walk in with a pitch deck or Callan charts or talk about your manager selection process is ridiculous.
Absolutely.
I mean, fortunately for me, I knew that's what all my competitors were doing, so I could just sit and wait my turn, and I was going to go in with a whole different message.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting. Once you learn, there's a skill set of identifying these weaknesses, and that brings you confidence so that you can walk into any situation and know that you're going to walk away with a meeting with your next ideal client.
Yeah.
And the advisors will often, when they first meet me, they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm excited about your program, but can you tell me how to find those $20 million prospects or 30 million?" I'm like, "Of course I can. That's what I work with."
Yeah.
But what if I put you in a room full of $20 million prospects today? There's 50 of them there.
Yeah.
Would you have any idea what to say? What to do?
Yeah.
How to what's your next step? What exactly are you going to say to those people?
Could you relate to them?
Could you relate to them? I mean, what are you going to even talk about? And the answer is, if people are honest, they're like, no. Well, let's work together. Let's figure out how they think, the exact words you should say to them to attract them. And so what I notice is when advisors pick up this skill, they gain the confidence and they become like magnets. It's like an aura that they have out there.
Totally.
Because, and a lot of times, if you think about, fake it till you make it or imposter syndrome, it's okay. At the beginning, it's okay. You kind of have to.
You have to fake it till you
You
make
have
it.
to.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I was always faking it. I think I told you the story about this very famous Dallas cowboy.
Yes.
And I remember, I'd been in the business 25 years by then. I get this meeting with the most famous Dallas cowboy ever, and I'm sitting in the parking lot and I'm shaking in my boots.
Yeah.
Not because I didn't know what to say,
Right.
but I'd never met anybody like this famous, right?
Yeah.
Well, he ended up referring a lot of his friends to me too. He became a client, and we're still friends now. But it's so even when you get to the level that I did, don't think for a moment that I didn't have times when I'm like, okay, let's see how this is going to go. And I'm telling myself, well, it'll be nice to see his office, but I'll probably be out in my car in 15 minutes. Well, no, 2.5 hours later, I had a new client.
Absolutely.
And the reason is I had built up the skill set, and I walked in and at least pretended the confidence, right? And I came out with a new client. So.
Yeah. You know, one market that I've been big in since the beginning of my practice is people in ministry. Pastors, people that have really unique, tax benefits, all things like this. As I've found that my ideal clientele, maybe personally might be a lot of those ministry folks, but professionally is not, right? Working with high net worth individuals has always been the ideal client for me. I want to be able to grow my practice, to be able to not, shy away from any of those people individually. So attracting your ideal client, the ideal of scaling and building a business that can run without you, that's beautiful to me, to be able to think about bringing other people in to be able to work with me, to still serve that area of people and not forfeit or neglect their business, but allow me to still work with the ideal client while still serving the people that I'm passionate about and care about. Did you ever find that there was the level that you had to draw a hard line of, I'm sorry, I can't work with you, but my team and my practice and firm have the same mission, so you'll work with these people?
Well, of course. And by the end, nobody got to work with me. Even this very famous Dallas Cowboy. I'm like, hey, here's the deal. Nobody gets me. And this is why it's important that you don't rely on me. What happens if you hear I got hit by a Mack truck? You're buying the philosophy of my firm. You have to agree to work with various members of my team. And I always had a lot of my team members involved in every client interaction, because what if one of them left? I didn't want them so dependent on this person that if this person left, they went with them or something. So it was very well orchestrated, and I wanted them, at least 3 to 5 people they would be interacting with at all times.
Yes.
And the funny thing is, when you tell people this is how my business operates, they believe you.
Yeah, it's true.
But the biggest thing is, to me, it's like you have to come up with, how does your business operate? What is the philosophy of your firm? How does your business operate? And these are your rules, and you just don't bend them.
Yep.
This is how you do business.
Absolutely.
I mean, do you think for a moment that you could walk into a doctor's office or a dentist's office and they're going to change the rules for you?
Nope.
I mean, when was the last time the dentist cleaned your teeth, for goodness sakes? Are you upset? Well, I hired you, the dentist.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's there for a root canal, but he doesn't have to be there to clean your teeth, the maintenance of the client.
Yes, and that example of the dentists need hygienists.
Right.
You brought that example to us in Nebraska, and I haven't thought about it, or I haven't forgotten about it since. You need a team. It takes an army to be able to accomplish a common goal in that way.
Yeah.
And so, I think that truthfully, the goal is to be able to walk away from your practice and know that it's in the same hands that you left it. You shared with us that when you actually did find the time to retire, your practice didn't skip a beat when you walked away. In fact, it sounds like there were a lot of clients that later on, when you finally did have a retirement party, said, wait a second, Erin's gone? I mean, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I sold my company in 2017 and 2021. And when I sold it, I got a big check. They didn't require me to come back the next day, nothing. And 4 years later, and there was no big announcement like, oh, Erin's gone, whatever. 4 years later, my team said, can we kind of get some closure on this? Can we have a retirement party for you? I'm like, sure. And all these clients came, oh, we're so excited for you. You finally get to retire. Well, I hadn't been in the office in 4 years, but great. I'm so excited,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was good.
That's incredible. The concept of credibility with financial planning fees. You'd mentioned high net worth individuals and what's important to them. Thinking like a high net worth individual, what are the things that are important to them? Typically, people who have reached that point, like you said, they're great at learning. They already know how to make the money.
Right.
That's their strong suit. And another quality is they're typically not afraid to pay for the best advice because they're used to getting the best. And people who are serious, no, you pay to get the best. If somebody's outstanding at what they do, you pay for it. So combating somebody who might have a ton of manageable assets versus like a client who has a huge net worth but not a lot of investable assets, you would argue that you can't be taken seriously or credible without charging an independent fee with that client, correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, when you get above $10 million, I mean, it's got to be relative to what the client would expect to pay for another person's advice that they value.
Right.
So case in point, I tell the story about a guy named Justin, and Justin had only been in my program 5 weeks, and he got the opportunity to get in front of a $40 million business owner.
Whoa.
And he'd been in business for 15 years, but he'd never charged financial planning fee. But he really, got into my course and he just went for it. And he got this opportunity. He said, Erin, if I wasn't taking your course, I wouldn't have taken the meeting because I wouldn't know what to say to the guy.
Yeah.
So he decided to binge watch. He goes, I listened all weekend, over and over and over, the secret sauce. He shows up on Monday and he just said, I stumbled through it, but he goes, at the end, the guy goes, okay, what's it going to take to solve these problems? And he said, Erin, because he called me after the meeting, he goes, I could just hear your voice channeling through my head. And what I always say is, in that situation, you say the biggest number that can come out of your mouth.
Yep.
And so he says, my annual financial planning fee will be $44,500. And the guy goes, done.
Yeah.
And always, when I tell that story to my students, I go, do you think Justin will ever work for free again? His business is completely transformed because
sure.
I check with him about once a year. And now his minimum fee is $10,500 per year. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he's got all these rules that he set up about his business. I'm so proud of him. And this was within a year, he completely transformed it.
Yeah.
He goes, now I'm the CEO. I only show up for, prospecting meetings with qualified prospects, and that's at least 10 million or above. And he's just really, he's set it up.
And I'm sure he has a team to handle those below.
He does.
Correct.
Well, and they handle everything. Again,
Yeah.
And so, I do try and stress, it doesn't happen all at once. I try and tell people, think about a 3-year process.
Yeah.
And so you do have to segment your client. I hope everybody has segmented their business. You segment them between A, B, C, and D. And then in year 1, we have step-by-step, how do you transition your C and D clients over to a licensed member of your team?
Yep.
Year 2 is how do you do your Bs? And year
Yep.
3 is your As. And I feel like, if somebody wants to keep their top 5 clients, that's fine. But what I found out, I didn't keep any. I'm like, they all have to go along with, this is the philosophy of my firm. And that wasn't mean that I was disinterested in anything about these people, because as prospects, I was the one closing. I still was the primary hunter. And then they had to agree to work with various members of my team. And I wanted, if I'm going to prospect you, I want you to refer your friend, this guy, right?
Totally.
So what I would do is, any of my A clients, I made sure that there was appointments were at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I would pop in and say, how you doing? And I would take them to dinner afterwards. Because I realized they wanted to be sitting across me with a glass of wine,
Right.
not across from me with a balance sheet.
Yeah.
And then I would also say, hey, why don't you invite your neighbors or your friends? I would prospect at dinner.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'd take, 2 or 3. If I always used to have like little pods. There would be, 10 couples that came, that started with you and then with you, and then I got a little pod, this pod over here. I get lots of members of the pod to come to that same dinner, so I could be interacting with. So I was never like not interacting, not caring about these people. I was asking about their children and their last vacation, and I went on vacation with a lot of them.
Yeah.
So I had these various pods, and I did a lot of dinners with them.
Yes.
But the idea of doing a meeting, oh my gosh. Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
there was no way. After 25 years in the business, no.
Yeah, and what you mentioned is the concept of unique ability is your unique ability is to relate to these people, understand how to solve their problems, and win their business.
Right.
Your unique ability is not, like you shared with your testing, doing all the support stuff for them. So by freeing yourself up to do your 20% of your unique ability, the 80% can be handled by others.
Totally.
Well, Erin, we are just so grateful for the time that you have spent with us today. Our practices, we are looking to individually grow, hire other people to be able to largely serve a greater good, reach more people, and ultimately on the last day of our work, be satisfied with the outcome of what our practices look like. So
Well, I feel like you're well on your way to doing it.
yes, well, thank you so much, Erin. Thank you, TED Talks Finance listeners. Thank you, Luke, for joining us today. And thank you, Mutual of Omaha, for having us here in Dallas this week. And again, we just are so grateful, Erin. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.